Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. Evan Carter never put much stock in conspiracy theories. He'd heard the stories, whispers in break rooms, late-night TV specials, podcasts his friends swore by. But in his mind, they were just people looking for patterns where none existed. Life was random, messy. So when his flight got rerouted through Denver International Airport, he didn't expect anything more than a dull layover. Sure, he'd heard the theories. Murals with hidden messages, strange architecture, underground tunnels that supposedly stretched for miles. But he'd never cared. Yet, as his cab pulled up to the massive airport, something felt off. The first thing that hit him was the statue. A massive blue Mustang towering over the entrance, its red eyes glowing in the fading daylight. Locals called it Lucifer, and standing beneath it, Evan understood why. He'd seen pictures before, but being in its presence was different. There was a weight to it, an unsettling energy that made his fingers tighten around his suitcase. He shook it off. Just travel fatigue. Inside, the airport buzzed with movement, footsteps echoing, voices blending into an indistinct hum. Evan checked his watch. 2 hours until his flight. Enough time for coffee and a walk. That's when he saw the murals, sprawled. Across entire walls, they stopped him mid-step. One showed chaos, fires raging, figures in gas masks, children weeping beneath a storm-dark sky. A few feet away, another depicted peace, a rainbow arching over smiling faces, hands reaching in unity. The contrast was jarring, intentional. Evan stepped closer, eyes scanning the details. Symbols were hidden in the background, patterns in, the clouds' shapes carved into mountains, shadows falling just a little too perfectly. It felt deliberate, like a code waiting to be cracked. Strange, isn't it? The voice made him jump. An older man in a janitor's uniform stood beside him, pushing a mop. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, studying Evan like he already knew what he was thinking. "The murals?" Evan asked. The janitor nodded. "People think they're just art, but they're more than that. Some say they're messages, warnings." Evan gave a short, nervous chuckle. "Warnings about what?" The janitor shrugged, but there was something knowing in his gaze. "Depends who you ask. Some say they show the end of the world. Others think they're clues to something bigger." Evan raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" The janitor leaned in slightly. "This place has secrets, kid. Ever hear about the underground tunnels?" Evan frowned. "You mean for luggage and maintenance?" The man's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's the official story." He tapped the mop handle against the floor. "But tunnels run deep. Some say deeper than they should. And some think..." He paused, as if considering his next words. "Let's just say there's more down there than suitcases." Evan stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or feel uneasy. The janitor held his gaze for a moment longer before straightening up. Without another word, he pushed his cart down the hall, whistling a slow, eerie tune. Evan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Just some old guy trying to spook a traveler, right? Yet, as he turned back to the mural, a strange thought took root in his mind. What if he wasn't? Evan walked down the hallway, the tune whistled by a passing janitor still echoing faintly in the cavernous space. He shook his head, telling himself it was just a bit of local lore, nothing more. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling the man had left him with. Something gnawed at his gut, an unease he couldn't quite explain. As he continued, he began noticing odd details he had missed before. The grotesque gargoyle sculptures perched near the baggage claim, their hollow eyes seeming to follow him. The way certain hallways curved subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if guiding him somewhere he had no intention of going. And then there, were the symbols, everywhere, etched into floor tiles, carved into walls, woven into the patterns of the carpeting. They weren't immediately noticeable, but once he started looking, he couldn't stop seeing them. Some were geometric, others abstract, yet they all seemed to share a common language, one Evan didn't understand but couldn't ignore. With over an hour left before his flight, he found himself wandering deeper into the airport, curiosity and unease warring in his mind. The bustling main terminal faded behind him, replaced by a quieter, dimly lit section. The air here felt different. The polished floors gave way to scuffed tiles, reflecting the occasional flicker of a dying fluorescent bulb. The further he walked, the more the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just the silence. It was a suffocating stillness, pressing against his skin like something alive. He tried to dismiss it, blaming nerves. Denver International Airport was massive, its labyrinthine layout enough to disorient anyone. But this was more than that. The usual hum of distant conversations, rolling suitcases, and steady footfalls was gone. It was as if this section had been abandoned, forgotten entirely. Then he saw it. At the end of a dim corridor, nestled between two maintenance doors, was another door. Unmarked, slightly ajar, a single flickering light buzzed above it, casting an anemic glow. The sight of it made his pulse quicken. Something about the door felt wrong, like it wasn't meant to be noticed. Yet here it was, beckoning him. He stopped a few feet away, heart hammering. His logical mind screamed at him to turn back. It was probably just a service entrance, restricted access, nothing more. But something in the pit of his stomach twisted at the thought of leaving it unexplored. It felt like a challenge, like a whisper daring him to step closer. His eyes flicked to the corners of the hallway. No security cameras, no signs, no staff. Nothing but silence. The sheer emptiness made everything feel surreal, like he had slipped between the cracks of reality. Slowly, he stepped forward. His sneakers squeaked against the tile. He reached for the door and pushed it open. The hinges groaned in protest. Beyond was a narrow stairwell, dimly lit by a single overhead bulb that flickered weakly. The air here was cooler, damp, with a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of his throat. His skin prickled as his foot hovered over the first step. He hesitated, swallowing down the lump in his throat before descending. The further he went, the heavier each step became. His breathing grew shallow. The dim glow from the hallway above faded behind him, swallowed by the dark. A low hum reverberated through the walls, a deep vibration that pulsed through his bones like a heartbeat. It was hypnotic, almost rhythmic, pulling him forward against his better judgment. At the bottom of the stairs, he stepped into a long, sterile hallway. The walls were stark, made of plain concrete and steel. Lining them were doors, identical, unmarked. The hum he'd heard earlier was louder now, pressing against his skull. A deep, steady thrum, like something massive and unseen, was breathing just beyond these walls. His fingers twitched at his sides, his instincts screaming. He wasn't supposed to be here, and he wasn't alone. Evan glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, looming behind him. But the stairwell was empty. The door at the top, gone, as if it had never existed. He wasn't sure why he kept walking. The hallway stretched endlessly, each identical section blurring into the next. The dim, flickering lights cast momentary clarity before swallowing him back into the gloom. His own footsteps sounded too loud in the suffocating silence, their echoes warping and amplifying. Every unmarked door he passed gnawed at his curiosity, though a gnawing dread crept in alongside it. Then he stopped. This door was different. It was heavier than the others, its metal surface etched with strange, intricate symbols. Geometric, familiar. Evan's pulse quickened as recognition dawned. He had seen these before. Murals, floor tiles, meaningless design elements, or so he had thought. But here, in this context, they felt sinister, deliberate, a message meant for someone who could understand it. He wasn't that someone. His hand hovered over the handle, hesitation pressing down on him like a weight. Then, voices, muffled, indistinct, but undeniably real. Low, deliberate tones, not casual, not relaxed. The cadence carried an urgency that made his skin crawl. He pressed his ear to the cold metal, his breath shallow, trying to make out even a single word. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. But curiosity was louder. He swallowed hard and gripped the handle. The metal was cool, unnervingly smooth. With a slow breath, he turned it. The door opened without resistance, releasing a soft hiss. A sterile light spilled out, banishing the shadows of the hallway. And Evan froze. The room was enormous, far larger than seemed possible. Monitors lined every wall, each displaying something different. Maps pulsing with red dots, blueprints, surveillance feeds, flickering between unfamiliar locations, lines of code scrolling too fast to read, air traffic patterns, satellite images, documents packed with dense, unreadable text. The hum of unseen machinery filled the air, punctuated by the occasional electronic beep. The atmosphere was clinical, but heavy, like the air in a room where something irreversible had just happened. At the room's center stood a circular table, its surface illuminated by a ring of built-in lights. Scattered across it were documents, schematics, and unidentifiable objects. And they weren't alone. A dozen figures stood around the table, deep in discussion. Their suits were dark, their movements precise. They spoke in hushed tones, their words clipped, purposeful. Even without seeing their faces, Evan could feel the weight of their presence. At the head of the table stood a woman. She didn't need to raise her voice to command the room. Her posture alone was enough. One hand rested on a thick file marked with the same symbols as the door. Her fingers tapped idly, rhythmically, against its cover, the only hint of impatience she allowed herself to show. Then, movement. One of them turned. Their gaze locked onto Evan. The conversation stopped. The air changed. A slow, sinking horror spread through his chest. He had made a mistake. A mistake he couldn't take back. And now, it was too late. Their words blended into a low murmur, heavy with authority. The air in the room was thick with unspoken weight, every movement precise, every pause calculated. These were not ordinary people. Their suits were tailored to perfection, their presence deliberate, practiced. Like men and women accustomed to the gravity of decisions that reshape the world in secret. Shadows played tricks on their faces, obscuring distinct features, but not their intent. They weren't just discussing, they were orchestrating. At the head of the table stood a woman who exuded complete control. Her spine was ramrod straight, her gaze scanning the room with a quiet, ruthless intensity. One hand rested on a thick folder, its surface etched with the same strange geometric symbol Evan had seen before. The murals, the floor tiles, meaningless until now. Here, in this room, the symbol wasn't decoration. It was a brand, a mark of significance he couldn't decipher. Her other hand moved occasionally as she spoke, her gestures sharp, decisive. Though he couldn't hear the words, the weight in her voice carried through the room. She wasn't simply part of the discussion. She was the axis around which it all revolved. Evan's breath hitched. His heart pounded against his ribs. He tried to make sense of what he was seeing, but his thoughts felt sluggish, tangled. This wasn't some forgotten storage, space, or a maintenance corridor tucked away in the airport's underbelly. This was something else, something bigger, a machine running beneath the surface of ordinary life, concealed in the least likely of places. And he had stumbled right into it. A creeping, gnawing dread settled into his gut. He wasn't supposed to be here. Then, movement. One of the figures at the table turned slightly, a subtle shift, a glance toward the door. At first, it seemed casual, but then their gaze locked onto Evan. The air changed. A chill ran down his spine. Their eyes pinned him in place, and suddenly, every instinct he had screamed at him to run. Turn around. Get out. But his feet wouldn't move. A battle waged in his mind between fear and disbelief. Maybe if he backed away slowly, pretended he'd seen nothing, a hand clamped down on his shoulder, firm, unyielding. He spun around, his pulse hammering in his ears. Two men stood behind him, dressed in black, their uniforms devoid of insignia. Their faces were blank, emotionless. Their eyes, however, held something else, something cold, assessing. A quiet menace, the kind that didn't need to be spoken. It was the confidence of men who never had to question their authority. One of them stepped closer. "You're not supposed to be here." His voice was low, deliberate. Each word a finality, a statement with no room for misinterpretation. Evan opened his mouth, his brain scrambling for an excuse. "A mistake. I got lost. I was just looking for the restroom. Anything." But no words came. His throat was dry, his thoughts scattered. The second man exchanged a glance with his partner. A decision was made. Before Evan could fully register what was happening, he felt a sharp prick at the base of his neck. A needle. His body jolted, a surge of adrenaline kicking in, but it was already too late. He tried to twist away, to fight, to demand an explanation, but the world around him was already softening, losing its edges. The room, the monitors, the people, the woman. Her eyes locked onto his one final time. Not with anger, not with fear, something colder, calculated, and then darkness. When Evan woke, he was slumped in a chair near his gate in the main terminal. The noise hit him first, loud, chaotic, disorienting. The steady hum of conversations, the distant drone of flight announcements, the rustle of movement around him. After the suffocating silence of that room, it felt surreal. His head throbbed. A dull ache radiated from the back of his neck. For a moment, he just sat there, trying to piece together the fragments of his memory. But everything was hazy, like trying to grasp smoke. Instinctively, he reached up, fingertips searching for the spot where the needle had pierced his skin. Nothing. No mark. No evidence that anything had happened. His flight was boarding. The overhead speakers crackled, pulling him back to reality. Still dazed, he pushed himself to his feet, legs unsteady, and reached for his bag. That's when he noticed it. The weight was wrong. It wasn't empty, and it wasn't his. Evan's hands trembled as he unzipped his bag. It was lighter. Too light. His stomach dropped. The camera. Gone. The spare memory cards he always kept in the side pocket. Gone. His breath hitched as he rifled through the bag, desperate to find something, anything. But there was nothing. No trace that he had ever recorded what he had seen. His fingers dug into the lining, searching for some reassurance, but the hollow space in his bag felt like confirmation. They had taken everything. A cold, creeping unease spread through his chest. It wasn't just the camera. Something else was missing. Fragments of his memory felt altered. The details of the hidden room, the monitors, the woman with the piercing eyes. They hovered just out of reach, like something glimpsed through fogged glass. He could remember being there. He could remember the fear, but the finer details, the words spoken in hushed urgency, the exact layout of the room, the sequence of events, felt slippery, dissolving every time he tried to grasp them. Had they done something to his mind? The boarding announcement echoed over the speakers, pulling him back to reality. He swallowed hard, hoisted the bag over his shoulder, and forced his feet toward the gate. His movements felt mechanical, detached, as if some part of him hadn't fully returned. He left Denver that night, but Denver never left him. The memory festered like an infection. At first, he tried to talk about it. Late-night conversations over, drinks, hesitant confessions to friends he trusted. He would start with, "Something weird happened at the airport once." But every time, the words felt ridiculous the moment they left his mouth. The skepticism in their eyes was immediate. The polite nods, the half smirks. Eventually, he stopped trying. He buried the memory, convinced himself it was easier to let it fade, but it never did. Every now and then, a headline about Denver International Airport would surface, or he'd catch a glimpse of its distinctive tinted roof in a photograph. And with it, the unease would creep back in, like a whisper at the back of his mind. The symbols, the murals, the strange, impossible room hidden beneath the airport, a splinter in his thoughts, impossible to remove. Years passed. He avoided Denver whenever he could. If a flight itinerary had him passing through, he'd pay extra for a different route. It was irrational, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the moment he set foot in that place again, someone, would be waiting for him. And yet, the question gnawed at him. The same question that had haunted him since that night. What had he seen beneath the airport? And how far would someone go to make sure he never found out? Evelyn Harper never considered herself extraordinary. She lived in a quiet Midwestern town, the kind of place where the days moved slow, the stars felt impossibly close, and the biggest news in the local paper was who won the pie contest at the county fair. A schoolteacher by trade, she found joy in the simplicity of her life, the gentle rhythm of her daily routine, the familiar creak of her old wooden floors, the way the sky burned in hues of lavender and peach at dusk. Her third-grade classroom was a world of its own, a place of wide-eyed curiosity, sticky fingers, and the soft scratch of pencils against paper. She wove stories into her lessons, turned spelling drills into songs, and delighted in the laughter of her students. Even when the day was long, when the noise pressed at the edges of her patience, she never questioned why she did it. After the last student had run out the door, Evelyn would linger in her classroom, tidying up stray crayons and stacking chairs. The empty hallways, the distant hum of a janitor's radio. It was in these quiet moments that she reflected, took a deep breath, and reminded herself that she belonged here. Her evenings were sacred. A simple meal, often something from her small garden, a book by the dim glow of her kitchen lamp, and then, always, the porch. Her house sat on the edge of town, where the fields stretched wide and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. She would step outside, tea in hand, and watch the night unfold. The stars were her oldest companions. She'd trace the constellations with her fingertips, whisper their names under her breath like old prayers. Sometimes she imagined that if she listened closely, the universe might whisper back. And yet, there was always something else. A whisper beneath the stillness, a faint tug at the edges of her contentment. She had never been the kind of person who longed for adventure, but there were nights when she stared at the sky a little too long, wondering. That Tuesday night was no different. At first, the air was thick with the scent of summer, warm and honeyed. The crickets played their usual nocturnal symphony, and the wind swayed through the tall grass in lazy waves. Evelyn cradled her tea, her fingers wrapped around the familiar heat of the mug, and exhaled. But something was off. The quiet was too deep, the air too still. A hush had settled over the fields, pressing in around her. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but watchful. Evelyn shifted in her chair, her pulse quickening though she couldn't say why. She lifted her gaze to the sky. The stars were too bright. They shimmered like shards of glass, piercing against the inky darkness. The moon hung low, bloated and silver, its glow casting unnatural shadows across the fields. A ripple of unease crawled up her spine. She told herself she was imagining it, the strange pull in the air, the weight of unseen eyes. She took a sip of tea, let the warmth spread through her chest, and tried to shake the feeling. The crickets had gone silent. Her breath caught. A shadow moved across the sky. Not a plane, not a bird. Something else. Something wrong. And in that moment, Evelyn Harper knew. The stars she had loved so dearly were about to change her life forever. Evelyn had always found solace in the quiet hum of the evenings. The rhythmic chirping of crickets was like an old, familiar melody, lulling her into a state of calm. But tonight, that melody stopped. Not gradually. 1 second, their symphony filled the air. The next, silence. A thick, unnatural silence that pressed down on her, heavy and absolute. She froze, her cup of tea hovering inches from her lips. Her pulse quickened as her gaze snapped toward the edge of the field. It wasn't uncommon for the crickets to pause if a predator lurked nearby, a fox maybe, or a stray cat. But this was different. This silence wasn't momentary. It stretched, on, suffocating, as if the entire world held its breath. Evelyn set her tea down, her hands trembling. Slowly, she leaned forward, gripping the armrests of her chair. The wind had stilled. The tall grass stood eerily motionless, as though frozen. Mid-sway, a chill coiled around her spine, and she pulled her shawl tighter, suddenly feeling how alone she truly was. And then she saw it, a light, faint at first, hovering just above the field. It was no bigger than a lantern, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Evelyn blinked. Was she imagining this? Was exhaustion playing tricks on her? But the light remained. It moved, not smoothly, not like a plane or a drone, but with unnatural precision, darting, stopping, reversing, almost deliberate, almost alive. Its glow shifted in color, soft blue, then green, then white, like something otherworldly, trying to decide what shade it wanted to be. Her breath hitched as she rose to her feet, her fingers gripping the porch railing for support. Her mind scrambled for rational explanations. Some new kind of aircraft? A trick of the atmosphere? A prank? But deep down, she knew. It wasn't man-made. The glow intensified, spilling across the field like liquid silver. The tall grass shimmered in its eerie light, casting unnatural shadows that stretched and twisted. Evelyn took a step back, then another. A sound filled the air, not loud, but low. A hum. It vibrated in her chest, resonating in her bones. The air thickened, charged with something electric, something alive. The night itself seemed to pulse in time with the glow. Then, without warning, the light vanished. Darkness swallowed the field. The stars, once brilliant, now seemed impossibly dim. Evelyn stood there, breathless, heart hammering against her ribs. Had she imagined it? But the silence remained. No crickets, no wind. No sign that anything had ever been there at all. Her legs felt weak as she stumbled back toward the door, her fingers fumbling for the lock. The metallic click of the deadbolt felt pitifully small, but she clung to it. A meaningless gesture of security. Inside, her home felt different. Off. The fridge hummed. The old clock ticked steadily on the wall. Sounds that should have comforted her. But they didn't. She paced, the image of the light seared into her mind. No matter how hard she tried to rationalize it, a trick of the light, a weather phenomenon, maybe even stress, the feeling in her gut told her otherwise. Something had been out there, watching. The old house creaked. A shadow shifted in the corner of her vision. Her pulse spiked. Evelyn grabbed her phone. She thought about calling someone. Her sister, maybe, or a colleague from the school. But what would she even say? That something had looked at her tonight, and she had looked back, was capable of making. It came from somewhere else, somewhere inside her. Evelyn pressed her hands against her ears, but it did nothing to block the low, resonant vibration that seemed to settle in her bones. It wasn't a hum. She heard. It was a hum she felt, a presence that coiled around her mind like fingers tightening around a throat. sleep became impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes, images that didn't belong to her. A landscape vast and endless, filled with impossible structures that pulsed with light. Shadows moving in ways they shouldn't. A feeling of weightlessness, cold air against her skin. And then, waking. Always back in her bed, always covered in dirt, always with more of those perfect, circular marks dotting her skin. She stopped mentioning it to people. The first time she had tried, offhandedly, with a forced laugh to her sister, there had been an awkward silence. Then a dismissive, "Maybe you should get some rest." She had tried to rest, but the lights wouldn't let her. And now, the field didn't feel like her field anymore. She still went to work, still taught her students, still exchanged pleasantries with colleagues who never noticed the dark crescents under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for a coffee mug. But she wasn't here anymore. She was there, wherever they were. The lights returned every night now. They were no longer distant. They hovered just beyond the tree line, close enough that she could see the way they shifted, the patterns within them. Evelyn told herself she wouldn't watch, that she would shut the curtains, lock the doors, pretend they weren't there. But she always watched. And worse, she felt them watching back. Then, one night, everything changed. The lights didn't just hover. They descended, a pulsing, rhythmic glow, sweeping across the field like a tide. The humming was deafening now. Inside her skull, vibrating behind her ribs. Evelyn tried to move. She couldn't. Her limbs felt detached from her mind, weightless. The edges of her vision darkened as a strange calm settled over her, drowning out the fear, the questions, the why. A single thought echoed in her head, but it wasn't hers. "You are ready." Darkness swallowed her whole. And then, morning. Sunlight streamed through the window. Birds chirped. The world was bright and ordinary, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Evelyn sat up in bed, her body feeling strangely rested for the first time in weeks. She moved to stand, and froze. The floor beneath her was wet. She looked down. Her bare feet were stained with something dark. Mud, grass, dew. As if she had been outside again, walking the field, wandering through the night. Her heart pounded as she pulled back the sleeve of her nightshirt. There, just below her wrist, was a new mark. Larger this time. Still circular, still perfect. And this time, it glowed. The sound didn't just fill the room, it filled her. It wasn't something she could hear so much as something she could feel, deep in her bones, vibrating in her chest like the growl of an unseen predator. It came from nowhere and everywhere all at once, threading itself through the walls, the floor, the very air. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut and pulled the pillow over her head. But it did nothing. The sound slithered past her defenses, pressing against her skull, wrapping around her like invisible hands. The home she had once cherished for its peace and solitude now felt like a trap. Shadows stretched too long across the floor. Every creak of the house set her nerves alight. Even the once soothing chirp of crickets outside had taken on a mocking tone, their songs stopping and starting like they knew something she didn't. Then came the silence, the kind that wasn't empty, but waiting. She stopped going onto the porch at night, stopped opening the blinds after dark. Even inside, with the doors locked and curtains drawn, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And then the light came again. That night, Evelyn sat curled on the couch, a flashlight gripped in her trembling hands. She hadn't slept in days, her body wired with exhaustion, but unwilling to surrender. The tea on the coffee table had long gone cold, its scent a bitter reminder of how much time had slipped away. It started as a faint glow, a flickering ember in the distance. Then it grew. The light seeped in through every crack, every seam, every tiny imperfection in the walls. It crawled beneath the door, pressed through the edges of the curtains, filling the room. Not just a glow, but a presence. It swallowed shadows, yet somehow cast its own. Long, twisting, unnatural shapes that didn't match the furniture or her own movements. Evelyn's breath hitched. The sound was back too, that deep, bone-rattling hum. Then she saw them. At first, just at the edges of her vision, figures shifting within the brightness, silhouettes stretching impossibly tall. The longer she stared, the clearer they became. Too slender, too fluid, like the space between moments in a dream. Their limbs moved with eerie precision, their heads tilting in ways that suggested understanding. She tried to focus on their faces. There weren't any, but she felt their gaze. Her fingers clenched around the flashlight, her knuckles turning white. Run, move, do something. But her body refused. The air was thick, pressing against her limbs like invisible chains. A choked sound clawed at her throat, but no scream came. The humming swelled, shaking the room, shaking her, as the figures drifted closer. The light pulsed, brighter, hotter, unbearable. Her eyes burned, tears streamed down her face. And then, darkness. When Evelyn woke, she was on the couch. The flashlight lay beside her, its weak beam flickering against the floor. The light was gone. The sound, nothing but an echo in her mind. The house was still, too still. She sat up slowly, her body aching as if she had run for miles. A sharp, lingering pressure curled around her chest. Instinctively, she reached for her neck and froze. Beneath her fingertips, cold and smooth as glass, was a perfect circle, a mark. Her pulse roared in her ears. It hadn't been a dream. It hadn't been nothing. They had been here, and she wasn't sure if they had left. Jobs that required little more than capturing staged team-building exercises and awkward icebreaker activities. The work was mindless, easy, exactly how he liked it. But something about this trip felt off. Maybe it was the way the hotel sat, isolated against the dark tree line, as if it had been placed there rather than built. Maybe it was the way the air felt heavier the higher he drove into the mountains, pressing against his skin like an unseen weight. Or maybe it was just the exhaustion creeping in from too many late nights, staring at his computer screen. Either way, by the time Jake checked into his room and set up his gear, a gnawing unease had settled in his gut. He shook it off. He was here for a job, nothing more. The first night passed uneventfully. Corporate speeches, forced laughter over overpriced cocktails, executives pretending they weren't one bad quarter away from cutting their staff in half. Jake filmed what he needed and retreated to his room, intent on editing some footage before bed. That was when he noticed it. At first, he thought it was a glitch in his software. A flicker in the playback, barely noticeable. A frame of static, interwoven between clips, appearing and vanishing too fast for his conscious mind to fully register. He frowned, scrubbing back through the footage frame by frame, and then he saw it. A shadow, not cast by anything in the room, not a trick of the light. It was there, standing just out of focus, lingering behind the subjects of his shots, watching. Prickle of cold sweat ran down his spine. Jake knew cameras. He knew how light worked, how artifacts could appear in footage, how glitches could happen. But this wasn't a glitch. He rewound again, played it forward. The shadow moved. He swallowed hard, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His logical brain scrambled for explanations, compression errors, corrupted files, some weird visual artifact caused by the low light. But then the audio distortion began. A low hum, barely perceptible at first. The longer he played the clip, the louder it got. A deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in his bones rather than his ears. Jake ripped his headphones off. His heart pounded. The room felt wrong now. Too still, the air pressing in around him. Slowly, He turned toward the window. Beyond the glass, the tree line stood inky and silent beneath the moonlight, and for a moment, he thought that maybe, just maybe, he had imagined it. And then, just beyond the reach of the hotel's floodlights, something moved. Jake's breath caught. The shape was tall, unnaturally so, and it was watching him. His fingers dug into the desk as the hum began again, not from his computer this time, but from somewhere inside the room. The screen in front of him glitched once more, the footage warping, not random now, not an error. A new image flickered into existence. Jake, sitting at his desk, from behind. And then, darkness. When Jake woke, the sun was already high in the sky. His laptop sat open, the footage untouched. The files were intact. No distortions, no shadows, no evidence of what had happened. Except for one thing. On the desk, right where his hand had been, lay a small metallic object, smooth, cold, etched with intricate patterns. Jake didn't remember picking it up. Didn't remember how he had gotten to bed. But as his fingers brushed over its surface, a chill curled through his spine. Somewhere in the deepest part of his mind, a new thought emerged. One that wasn't entirely his own. It wasn't over. Here's your rewritten story with added realism, dialogue, psychological suspense, and character backstory, while maintaining the same word count. Jake preferred assignments that didn't demand much creativity. Just point, shoot, and get paid. His job here was simple. Film team-building exercises, keynote speeches, and some candid shots for future promotional materials. It wasn't exactly thrilling, but in Jake's world, easy money was the best kind. The email had come a week prior, sent by an event planning company he'd worked with a few times before. The instructions were straightforward. Arrive Friday morning, set up, and be ready to shoot by noon. Meals and accommodations were covered, and the generous day rate made the 2-hour drive worth it. No hesitation, he accepted. Corporate gigs were dull, but the promise of a few days in a mountain resort beat lingering in his cramped apartment. As Jake pulled up to the hotel, he whistled under his breath. The place was extravagant, an opulent estate with towering spires, ivy-clad stone walls, and an air of old-world exclusivity. The circular driveway was lined with neatly trimmed hedges, and valet attendants darted between sleek black sedans and polished sports cars. Jake glanced at his own vehicle, a dented sedan with peeling paint. He sighed, driving past the main entrance to the staff lot. He was used to being an outsider at these kinds of places. Inside, the hotel was even more intimidating. The lobby gleamed with marble and crystal, a grand chandelier casting fractured light over polished floors. A fireplace crackled in one corner, radiating warmth against the cool air. The scent of fresh flowers and expensive wood polish clung to the air, and a soft classical melody played in the background. He checked in with Lauren, the event coordinator, mid-30s, sharp-eyed and efficient. She barely looked up from her clipboard. Mix of wide shots and close-ups, she instructed. The CEO's speaking this afternoon. Set up early, no hiccups. Got it, Jake replied. She was already moving on to another task, barking instructions to staff setting up floral centerpieces. He wheeled his equipment through the halls, making mental notes on lighting, angles, and exits. The conference hall was enormous, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing an untouched expanse of forest. Jake took a moment to soak in the scenery before getting to work. He set up his tripod near the back, ensuring a clear shot of the stage and audience. He checked audio levels twice, triple-checked battery life, and positioned a backup camera. Experience had taught him paranoia was a photographer's best friend. The morning passed in a blur. He captured footage of the pristine grounds, the crisp mountain air carrying the murmur of small talk and polite laughter. Attendees sipped coffee and exchanged handshakes, all dressed in power suits and exuding the kind of effortless confidence that came from boardroom battles and six-figure salaries. Jake watched them through the lens, detached. He didn't belong in their world, but he was good at making it look polished. By lunch, he had more than enough footage. The buffet spread was impressive. Imported cheeses, artisanal bread, delicately plated entrees. He grabbed a plate, keeping to himself in a corner near the window. That was when he noticed something odd. At a table near the back, a man sat alone. Unlike the others, he wasn't engaged in conversation, nor did he wear a name tag. His suit was slightly off, too formal, stiff, like he was trying too hard to blend in. And then there were his eyes. Jake had spent years behind a lens, observing details most people overlooked. And this guy, he wasn't just watching, he was studying, calculating. The man's gaze flicked up, meeting Jake's. For a split second, something unreadable passed between them. Then, the man smiled. And just like that, something about this job didn't feel routine anymore. Jake bit into his sandwich, the fresh crunch of lettuce and the richness of smoked turkey, making him realize just how pitiful his usual diet of instant ramen truly was. The lunch spread was a far cry from what he was used to, but he didn't complain. Perks of the job. After finishing his meal, he made his way back to the conference hall. The day had been smooth so far, predictable, just the way he liked it. Corporate gigs were rarely exciting, but they paid well and kept the lights on. As he stood at the back of the hall, adjusting the focus on his camera, something caught his attention. A group of men in dark suits entered through a side door. They moved with quiet precision, their suits sharper than those worn by the regular attendees. These men weren't executives. Jake was sure of it. Their posture was too rigid, their demeanor too controlled. They didn't glance around the room like the other guests, scanning for old colleagues or networking opportunities. Instead, they moved with purpose, their eyes locked forward. Jake's gaze flicked to Lauren, the event coordinator. The men exchanged a few brief words with her. She nodded curtly, her face carefully neutral, before gesturing toward a set of heavy double doors at the far end of the hall. Without hesitation, the men disappeared through them. A flicker of unease rippled through Jake's stomach. Something about the exchange was off, but he shook it off. This was a high-end corporate retreat. Big-name executives meant big-name security. He'd seen it before. Private bodyguards, discreet escorts, all part of the business world's elite. Class. Nothing unusual. Probably. Still, the image of the men lingered in his mind long after he returned to work. That night, after a long day of shooting, Jake slung his camera bag over his shoulder and made his way back to his room. His thoughts drifted to the edits he needed to tackle, but as he stepped into the dimly lit lobby, something pulled his attention back to the scene in front of him. They were there again. The men in suits. This time, they were clustered near the side entrance, their postures stiff, their voices low. Their presence commanded the space without effort. Unlike the hotel staff, who carried themselves with polished hospitality, these men moved with the quiet authority of professionals used to operating just under the surface of attention. Jake slowed his steps, stretching his arms in a feigned act of nonchalance while his gaze flicked toward the entrance. Several black SUVs were parked in a neat row just outside. Their windows were tinted so dark they reflected the towering pine trees like obsidian glass. Unmarked. Something about them felt heavy. Jake had seen private security before. He'd even worked events with bodyguards hovering near their clients, watching for signs of trouble. But this was different. There was an intensity in the air, a subtle but undeniable weight. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check his messages, using the screen's reflection to observe them without making it obvious. Their conversation was clipped, almost rhythmic, each word short and precise. He couldn't make out what they were saying, but the occasional glance toward the SUVs told him something serious was happening. And then, one of them turned. Jake stiffened. The man's eyes locked onto him, and for the first time, Jake felt something cold curl down his spine. It wasn't just the gaze itself, it was what lay behind it. A sharpness, a calculation, like he had just been categorized. Jake forced himself to keep moving, heart pounding as he strode toward the elevator. He told himself it wasn't his business. Just another high-profile guest with an overprotective security detail. But deep down, he knew something was off. The next morning, his suspicions only deepened. Jake was setting up his equipment in one of the conference rooms when a new group of guests arrived. There were about a dozen of them, men and women alike, dressed in impeccably tailored suits. But unlike the previous attendees, who had the relaxed air of corporate professionals here, for a weekend of networking and motivational speeches, these people carried themselves differently. Their movements were deliberate, too measured. They didn't stop to chat, didn't make eye contact. They walked with synchronized purpose, heading toward the same set of double doors the men in suits had disappeared through the night before. Jake's grip on his camera tightened. Something was happening in this hotel. And he was starting to wonder if he was supposed to see any of it at all. Jake's fingers hovered over his laptop keyboard, his mind too restless to focus on editing. The unease that had been creeping through him all day was now a tangible thing, pressing against his ribs like a held breath. He played back the footage he'd captured, pausing on moments that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now sent an itch down his spine. The briefcases clutched too tightly, the hushed conversations, the way those men and women moved, not just with confidence, but with a kind of silent urgency, like people who didn't want to be seen but couldn't avoid it. And then, the knock at his door, sharp, precise. Jake's stomach clenched as he set his laptop aside and stood. He hesitated for just a second before opening the door. A hotel staff member stood there, a man in his mid-30s, wearing the standard uniform, but looking anything but composed. His fingers twitched slightly as he held out an envelope. "There's been a slight change in plans," the man said, his voice controlled but tight. "The client requests that you avoid filming in certain areas tomorrow." Jake frowned. "What areas?" The man unfolded a map of the hotel, a few sections marked in yellow highlighter. Jake's eyes traced the highlighted zones. Most were places he hadn't even been assigned to film. A few meeting rooms, a hallway near the conference wing, and, most notably, the corridor leading to the heavy double doors he'd been watching all day. His pulse ticked up. "Why?" he asked. The staff member hesitated. I don't know. I was just told to deliver the message." His gaze flicked down the hallway, as if making sure no one was watching. "Just stick to the main areas, all right?" Before Jake could press for more, the man turned and hurried away, his footsteps quick, as if he didn't want to be seen lingering at Jake's door. Jake shut the door but didn't move. The unease, once a slow trickle, was now a full flood. This wasn't paranoia. Something was happening in this hotel. Something carefully orchestrated. Something meant to stay out of sight. And someone knew he had noticed. He didn't sleep much that night. At around 2 a.m., he was still staring at his laptop screen, editing footage with one ear tuned to the silence of the hotel. Every so often, he'd glance at the envelope sitting on the nightstand, that highlighted map practically burning a hole in his mind. A part of him told him to let it go. This wasn't his world. He was just a videographer, a guy with a camera, here to capture team-building exercises and keynote speeches. And yet, at 2:37 a.m., a sound made him freeze. A faint thud from the hallway, then a low murmur of voices. Jake moved carefully, padding toward the door. He pressed his ear against it, heart hammering. More voices, quiet but firm. A rustle of movement. Then, the unmistakable sound of something heavy being wheeled down the corridor. He reached for the handle, an almost instinctual urge to see. But something stopped him, an overwhelming sense that if he opened that door, there was no going back. So he just stood there, breathing slow, listening. The voices faded. The wheeled object, a cart, a case, was rolled farther down the hallway toward the unmarked doors, then silence. Jake exhaled, stepping back. This wasn't just an exclusive business retreat. It was something else entirely, and he was right in the middle of it, that room, of the faces around that table, of the words on that projector screen, global. Economic transition strategy, phase 3, were burned into his mind. The ride home was a blur. His fingers gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his pulse still thrumming in his ears. Every time he blinked, he saw the documents, the figures, the plans that no one was supposed to see. Population control measures, energy, resource, redistribution. It wasn't just a retreat. It was a quiet, unseen hand shaping the future. And he had seen too much. The night air whipped through his open window, but it did nothing to clear the thick fog of fear settling in his chest. Who were those people? What were they planning? And more urgently, what would they do to keep it secret? Jake barely made it through the front door of his apartment before the exhaustion hit him like a wave. He locked every bolt, pulled the curtains shut, and collapsed onto the couch, his body vibrating with leftover adrenaline. His camera bag sat on the floor where he dropped it. Useless. They took the memory card, but Jake had spent too many years working as a videographer to be careless. He always backed up his footage. He grabbed his laptop, fingers shaking as he pulled up his external drive. He had been transferring files automatically while editing between sessions, raw footage, background shots, even a few clips of the odd arrivals. His breath hitched when he saw it. A single corrupted file, labeled only with a time code. Jake hesitated before clicking it open. The screen flickered, the video distorted and glitched. His own voice whispered through the speakers, muffled, broken. Doesn't make sense. What is this? Oh shit! Then, silence. He tried to rewind, but the file stuttered, refusing to play again. Someone had wiped his footage remotely. His stomach dropped. They weren't just watching him at the hotel. They were still watching him now. The following days were a quiet kind of hell. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him. The man at the coffee shop who lingered too long at the counter. The SUV parked half a block from his apartment for 2 days straight. The unmarked envelope slipped under his door with a single printed message. This is your only warning. Jake stopped sleeping. He kept his phone off, his laptop disconnected. He considered leaving town, but a deep, gnawing certainty told him it wouldn't matter. If they wanted to find him, they would. The fear was suffocating. But beneath it, something else was growing. Anger. They had erased his footage, but they hadn't erased his memory. He knew what he saw, and he wasn't going to let them bury it. Jake opened his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keys. If they were watching, they'd see this. He didn't care anymore. His first message was short. A videographer goes to film a corporate retreat, but what he finds is something bigger, something terrifying, and they don't want you to know about it. He attached what little footage remained, fragments of distorted images, and hit send. To journalists, to whistleblowers, to anyone who might listen. Then he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. It had begun. What he'd seen burned into his mind like a brand, the fragments of conversation looping over and over in his head. He knew he was in danger, but he also knew. Someone had to know the truth. The world had to know. Over the following weeks, Jake found himself obsessed, hunting down every scrap of information he could. The Bilderberg Group, an annual meeting of elites cloaked in secrecy, was real. He matched the faces he'd seen that night to high-profile politicians, CEOs, and media moguls. Every connection led to another. Documents hidden in plain sight. Names whispered in obscure forums. He didn't just research anymore. He documented, compiled, archived. Late nights turned into sleepless weeks. He worked in the shadows, uploading encrypted files to anonymous forums, each post a calculated risk. He knew what happened to people who dug too deep. But the weight of the truth was heavier than the fear pressing down on him. Then, a knock. Jake froze, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. Another knock, louder this time. His pulse pounded in his ears. No one knew where he lived. Not anymore, not since he started pulling at the threads. He shut his laptop, his breathing shallow. The silence stretched, thick as tar. Then, from the other side of the door, a slow, deliberate exhale. Jake's stomach twisted. He never answered the door. Liam. Mercer had always prided himself on being a man of reason. In a world teeming with half-truths and hysteria, he found solace in structure, certainty, logic. His colleagues called him the go-to guy, the one who could debug a broken system with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. To Liam, every problem was a puzzle. Every puzzle had a solution, and no solution required paranoia or irrational leaps. His life was as structured as his mind. Wake at 7 a.m. sharp, no snooze, never. A single cup of dark roast, black, no sugar. News scanned with detached interest. World events, tech updates, market shifts. No drama, no speculation, just data. His apartment mirrored his mindset. Neat, efficient, minimal. Grey walls, lined with books on system architecture, and the occasional sci-fi novel he rarely admitted to liking. His closet? A careful palette of blues, greys, and blacks. No wasted energy on decision-making. Work was no different. Liam arrived precisely 10 minutes early. A nod to the receptionist. Straight to his desk. Everything in its place. Monitor, centered, keyboard spotless. A small potted plant adding the faintest touch of humanity to an otherwise sterile space. He didn't love his job, but he respected it. It was predictable, reliable, unlike the people around him, while others speculated. Liam, focused. Co-workers wasted time spinning theories about system failures, server crashes, the occasional breach. Liam ignored the why. That wasn't his concern. How to fix it, that's what mattered. That's what he did, with practiced precision, fingers flying over the keyboard. Outside of work, his life followed the same careful pattern. Saturdays, the same coffee shop, the same latte, the same corner booth. He hiked the same trails, never straying from the marked paths. His social circle, small but dependable. Friends who preferred board games to bar hopping, debates about movie plot holes over mindless chatter, routine, order, control, until something subtle, almost imperceptible, shifted. His inbox, a message he didn't recognize, a string of numbers, a feeling in his gut. Illogical but undeniable. For the first time in years, Liam hesitated before opening it. And for the first time in his life, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd been looking at everything the wrong way. Here's your rewritten story, enhanced with realism, psychological suspense, and character depth, while maintaining the same word count. From the outside, Liam's life might have seemed dull, predictable even. But to him, that was exactly how it should be. He didn't crave adventure, didn't need the thrill of the unknown. The world made sense when it was orderly, when every day followed the same careful rhythm. And that's why what happened next unsettled him so profoundly. Liam Mercer was a man who believed in facts, the tangible, the explainable, the logical. But as he was about to discover, not everything in life could be neatly categorized. Some questions were bigger than he had ever imagined. His palms were clammy as he typed, forcing his fingers to move at their usual steady pace. His breathing felt wrong, too controlled, too deliberate. He kept his expression neutral, but his thoughts were racing. Beside him, the technician studied the screen for a second too long. Liam didn't dare look up. He could feel the weight of the man's gaze, the slight tension in his posture. Stay calm. Good, the technician finally said, crossing his arms. Management doesn't like delays. Liam forced a small nod. Won't be long. The server room was cold, the air thick with the hum of machines. He clicked through the diagnostic checks, his mind working through a dozen possibilities at once. He couldn't unsee what he'd just uncovered. The diagrams, the logs, the video. This wasn't some elaborate prank or half-baked experiment. The data was too intricate, too layered. He had worked in IT long enough to recognize the difference between theory and reality. And this was real, whatever it was. His peripheral vision caught a flicker of movement. The technician's fingers drummed lightly against his arm in an oddly rhythmic pattern. A nervous tick, or something else. Liam swallowed, keeping his movements steady, his internal. Clock told him he'd been in here too long. "I'll need a few more minutes," he said, keeping his voice neutral. Encryptions layered in a way I didn't expect. The technician's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, he shifted, slightly leaning against the doorframe. His presence, watchful, calculated, felt less like oversight and more like surveillance. The air in the room felt thinner. Liam finished the diagnostics, but his thoughts wouldn't settle. He had two choices. Walk away now, pretend he never saw any of it, or dig deeper. If this technology was as significant as it seemed, was it ethical or even safe to ignore it? He wanted answers. But more than that, he wanted to make sure that whatever this was, it wouldn't be used for something dangerous. "I'll test the backup," he said, his tone carefully professional. He navigated to a generic set of files, making it look like he was running a final integrity check. Outwardly, everything appeared routine, but inwardly, he was building a plan. He couldn't extract anything. Not here. Not while he was being watched. But if he could memorize key terms, something to research later, he might have a way forward. A flicker of movement. The technician had glanced at his phone, his attention momentarily elsewhere. It was a small window, but it was enough. Liam opened the diagnostic console and, with quick, practiced keystrokes, embedded a few lines of innocuous-looking code. A simple keylogger, enough to grant him remote access once he was off-site. It was a risk. If anyone noticed the intrusion, it could blow his cover, but the need to know outweighed the danger. "There," Liam said, his voice steady. "Server's stable. You shouldn't have any more issues." The technician stepped forward, scanning the monitor. "Good." A pause. "I'll need you to file a report before you leave. Standard protocol." Liam nodded, already gathering his tools. "Of course." He kept his expression neutral, kept his movements precise, even as every instinct inside him screamed, "Leave. Now." "Here's your rewritten version, with enhanced realism, psychological suspense, and character depth, while keeping the word count intact." The technician didn't say much as he led Liam down a narrow hallway, his footsteps too controlled, too even. They stopped outside a small windowless office. Inside, a plain metal desk held a clipboard with a form, standard procedure. Liam sat down, forcing himself to breathe evenly. The questions were routine. Describe the issue, steps taken to resolve it. Confirm server functionality. Simple. He filled it out with meticulous care, ensuring his handwriting remained steady despite the tremor in his fingers. When he finally handed it over, the technician skimmed it, his face unreadable. "You're clear to go." His voice was flat, his gesture toward the exit almost dismissive. Liam forced a polite smile. "Thanks. Let me know if anything else comes up." The walk back through the facility felt endless. Security checkpoints, ID scans, a logbook signature, each step heavier than the last. His stomach twisted, not with regret, but with the sheer gravity of what he'd seen. By the time he reached his car, his hands were shaking. He fumbled the keys, cursing under his breath. A deep breath. Another. He slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The drive home passed in a blur. His thoughts swirled like a storm. Fragments of diagrams, code logs, grainy footage looping in his mind. The vanishing man. The terminology that shouldn't exist. Temporal displacement. Protocols. He had opened a door he was never meant to find. And yet, under all the fear, an undeniable thrill crept in. If this is real, it could change everything. Science, history, reality itself. But as he pulled into the driveway of his modest apartment complex, doubt flickered. What if someone noticed? What if the technician had seen through his act? What if the keylogger was already detected? Liam shook his head, trying to silence the paranoia. He had been careful, precise, methodical. He stepped out of the car. His eyes flicked toward the street. A black sedan sat parked a few houses down. Tinted windows, too dark to see through. It could be nothing. A neighbor, a visitor, a random car. And yet, as he climbed the stairs to his apartment, a cold sensation crawled up his spine. He was being watched. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Liam went through the motions, closing the diagnostics, securing his tools, pretending that everything was normal. But inside, his thoughts churned. The diagrams, the footage, the man disappearing into thin air. He replayed it over and over in his head, like a corrupted video file looping on a screen. Was it real? Was it an advanced simulation? A classified experiment? And if it was real, why had it been stored on a server so poorly maintained that someone like him, an outsider, had to fix it? The pieces didn't fit, yet somehow they did. One thing was certain, he wasn't meant to see what he saw. As he exited the server room that day, the lab technician had barely acknowledged him. But Liam had caught it. That fraction of a second where the man's gaze had locked onto the flash drive peeking from Liam's bag. Liam had zipped it closed, forcing a casual nod as if nothing was amiss. The technician said nothing, but his eyes had lingered. The process of leaving the lab had felt different, slower, checkpoint after checkpoint, each guard scanning his ID a second longer than usual, their eyes drifting toward his bag, their expressions just a little too neutral. His palms had been clammy, but he kept his movements deliberate. There was no reason to suspect him, no way for them to know what he had done. He had done his job, fixed the issue, followed procedure. At least, that's what it looked like. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Liam stepped out into the crisp evening air, and the black sedan was still there. Here's your story, rewritten for deeper realism, psychological suspense, and engagement while maintaining the word count and key details. The afternoon air was thick with the scent of impending rain, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. Liam inhaled deeply, hoping to quiet his spiraling thoughts. His car was parked in the far corner, away from the others. As he approached it, the flash drive in his bag felt heavier with each step, pressing against his conscience. Was it a mistake to take it? Should he have left everything behind and walked away? The question churned in his mind, unanswered, as he slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The drive home felt surreal, the hum of the car blending with the noise in his head. He replayed every moment, every glance, every word spoken by the technician, the way security's eyes had lingered a beat too long. Had they noticed? Did they? Suspect. His gaze flicked to the flash drive resting on the passenger seat, a simple, plastic device. Small, harmless, except it wasn't. It was a ticking time bomb, filled with answers he wasn't sure he wanted but couldn't ignore. His logical side whispered, destroy it. Forget it ever existed. But another voice, the one driven by relentless curiosity, refused to let go. By the time he pulled into his apartment complex, dusk had settled over the city. He parked in his usual spot, scanning the lot out of habit. Most spaces were empty, a handful of cars illuminated by dim porch lights. His eyes lingered on a black SUV parked near the entrance. Its windows were tinted so dark they reflected the streetlights. It could have been anyone's car. And yet, something about it made his stomach twist. Shaking the thought, He grabbed the flash drive and headed inside. The silence of his apartment was deafening. He locked the door behind him, set his tools down, and stood motionless in the entryway, gripping the flash drive as if it might vanish. His laptop sat waiting, the screen dark, expectant. Liam hesitated, his heart pounded, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a shroud. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he sat at his desk, inserted the flash drive, and opened the files. What he found consumed him. Logs of temporal excursions, experiments involving objects, coins, watches, sent back in time, observed for changes. Then, buried deep within the data, something worse. People. The entries were vague, but one line stood out. Subject failed to return. Possible instability in temporal anchor. Liam shuddered, his breath hitching. Over the next week, he barely ate, barely slept. The implications of what he'd uncovered gnawed at him like a parasite. If time travel was real, it explained historical anomalies, unexplainable artifacts, sudden leaps in technology. But the most terrifying possibility, could the government be rewriting history? The paranoia crept in slowly at first, a lingering unease. Then it sharpened into something real. A black SUV, parked outside his building. 3 nights in a row. His phone glitched. Calls dropped for no reason. And then one evening, he returned home to find his apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, no signs of a break-in, but something felt wrong, as if someone had been there. The breaking point came when the package arrived, unmarked, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside, a single note. Stop digging. Liam's hands trembled as he read the words. He knew what this was. A warning, a final chance to let it go. But as much as he wanted to, he couldn't, because the truth was right in front of him, and there was no turning back now. What Jake had seen was burned into his mind, the fragments of conversation replaying over and over. He knew he was in danger, but he also knew the truth had to come out. Over the following weeks, he began connecting the dots, researching the Bilderberg Group, an exclusive annual meeting of the world's elites, and matching the faces he'd seen to public figures. He uncovered references to other secret gatherings, hidden in plain sight, and meticulously documented their locations and agendas. It became an obsession. Working in secret, he uploaded encrypted videos and files to anonymous forums, fully aware of the risks, but unable to ignore the urgency of his discovery. Then one night, as he sat hunched over his laptop in his dimly lit apartment, a knock at the door sent a chill through him. His blood ran cold. No one should have known where he lived, not since he started digging deeper. The knock came again, louder this time. He never answered the door. Thank you for joining us tonight on Sleep Theories. Let this story remind us of the hidden forces shaping our world and the courage it takes to uncover the truth. May your dreams be filled with curiosity and wonder, and may you sleep soundly, knowing that even the darkest mysteries can be brought to light. Sweet dreams and good night.